We have to teach kids it's okay to be angry. It's not okay to be mean. It's okay to be upset. It's not okay to be destructive. Allowing kids to have whatever feelings they have, but that doesn't mean we need to start over explaining things or over empathizing with them or over negotiating or over accommodating.
You're listening to Parenting with Impact, the podcast for parents like you, raising complex kids to become capable, independent adults, even in this complicated world. Each episode brings expert insights and real-life strategies to help you parent with confidence, calm, and clarity. Here are your hosts, Elaine and Diane.
Welcome back, everybody, to another conversation in the Parenting with Impact podcast. My guest actually has a name known to many of you as the ADHD Dude. He actually has a real name. It's Ryan Wexelblatt, and I'm thrilled to have you here. Welcome, Ryan.
So much for having me.
It's fun to be in conversation with you always. Ryan and I have had lots of conversations over the years. We see each other at conferences, and we have a lot of complementary approach to navigating complex kids and ADHD. And then we differ in a lot of areas. And I think what's interesting about us is we don't always agree.
Right.
But you know, on the whole, I think we're in alignment.
Yeah.
So let's dive in. Tell us a little bit about how you came to be doing the work that you do. How'd you come to become the ADHD Dude?
Yeah, so it was a little bit of an accident. When I finished graduate school, I have my master's in social work. I went to work at a special education school for kids with behavior challenges, I think most of whom we would classify as complex kids.
Right.
And I just kind of fell into it that way. So I started working in special ed. I had my school social work certification, primarily worked in, private special education schools through my school career. Also had a private therapy practice as well, where I just focused on ADHD and what we used to call Asperger's. So there was that piece. And then the summer camp, actually, that I just sold. And now the director's taking that over as well, called Trip Camp. So it was just kind of a natural progression for my school career, really. And then, I think the other part was, obviously, I'm a parent to a definitely complex kid, or I'm sorry, I should say complex young adult. So that is really what made me kind of dive more into this, I would say.
Yeah. So in your practice, I know your kid's older, but in your practice, you've typically focused on younger kids, elementary, middle, like what's your...
Yeah. So, in school, I primarily worked with middle schoolers for the most part. A little bit elementary, a little bit high school. My private practice, I would say the age range was pretty much, 11 to 15. That was the biggest group of kids who would come to my school year programs that I run. And then the camp is middle school and high school. But I would say now with ADHD Dude, it's more elementary and middle school.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. And what is it? What's your message to parents of kids with ADHD and related conditions? And let's stay focused on this audience of parents of kids of elementary and middle school kids.
Yeah. So I think my first message is kids are not fragile; they are anti-fragile. And I think it's easy for parents to lose sight of that on a day-to-day basis when life is hectic. And I think there's also increasingly a lot of messages telling parents, no, they are fragile and treat them as fragile, which I don't think is necessarily helpful. And I think my second message would be to, look at this as it's a work in progress, and skill development is a work in progress. That's going to involve 3 steps forward and 2 steps back. That's why they say ADHD is a condition of inconsistent performance. And I think that's important to keep in mind, because I think it's easy to get discouraged. I mean, I know I certainly did when my son would have, I don't want to call them setbacks, but would have incidents in school or whatever it is. So, yeah.
Yeah, that pit in the stomach that you get every time you see the number on the phone or the email. I was saying to my son, so my kids are also young adults now, and I was saying to my son recently that the best part of him getting out of school is that I never have to hear from a school again. And it's so lovely. Because I do remember I almost at some point started having like almost a trauma response, to that. So let's take these 2 topics a little separately. Let's start with kids are anti-fragile, or kids aren't as fragile as parents typically think. What do you mean by fragile?
Yeah. So when I say fragile, I want parents to think of their kids as being resilient. So because, they want something for, you made something for dinner and they want something different, that doesn't mean you need to accommodate them. Okay. And because you say to them, I'm not making something else, so you can have, what I made, or you can have cereal, they're not going to be sitting in a therapist's office 20 years from now saying, my mother was so horrible. She didn't, make me chicken fingers. Right.
Right.
And I think that's the first thing. So to keep in mind, they'll be okay. Kids are resilient and we need to build resilience.
Right. And those are kind of two different things, right? Part of it is starting with the assumption that they can be resilient. We have to
Yeah.
believe that that's possible. And, as I hear just that example of, parents who are bending over backwards to, make sure because I'm afraid my kid's not going to eat and he's on medication. And so if he doesn't eat, then he's going to get right. So that we become parents, I think, have this whole story in their head about what their responsibility is. And that can lead them to treating their kids as if they're less than capable.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
So kids are resilient and they're capable. What's the parent's responsibility? How does a parent foster resilience?
Well, I think number one, by remembering and having this mindset, growth mindset, and remembering that they are not fragile, they are anti-fragile, and know that, when one of the things I really focus on a lot is talking about family accommodation. Now, when I talk about accommodation, I don't mean, accommodations in IEP or 504 plan or those necessary kind of accommodations. When I talk about accommodation, what I'm talking about is, changes parents make in their or family members make in their behavior to alleviate or avoid the child's temporary distress. Now, so for example, the one I just gave about, if they don't want what you're having for dinner and making, something new. Yeah, they might be upset with you for a little bit, but they'll get over it. And I think that's kind of the point where it's hard sometimes to see the forest through the trees is when kids are upset with parents, or they're saying, you don't care about me, or you don't care about my feelings, and so on. So I think it's just keeping the bigger picture in mind. And one of the things that I really believe in emphasizing to people is that, I believe that we want to help kids reach their full potential. And in order to do that, we have to, help them develop resilience and develop, grit or, a growth mindset, in order to do that.
So it sounds like, as I'm hearing what you're saying, like to me, I don't see the two things as incongruous, right? You can foster resilience and a growth mindset and still make appropriate accommodations. So, and not inappropriate accommodations, right? So making a special dinner might be an inappropriate accommodation unless that kid's got serious food issues, right? But what would be an appropriate accommodation for parents to make when kids have development delays?
So let me say it this way. A mom said to me, she said, the more flexible I became, the more inflexible my son became. And that was a really good example for me of, what family accommodation, the unhelpful accommodations can look like. So let me give some examples. So, allowing child to sleep in your bed because they, get scared about sleeping in their own bed, dropping, your other child off first, which is, out of your way because your child wants to, finish playing a game on their iPad.
Right. Okay.
Accommodating their inflexibility in any way, those types of things.
Okay. So we talk a lot at Impact about what we call flexible structure.
Mm-hmm.
So, and the notion is that you want to have a structure in place and that sometimes you need a little flexibility, but that doesn't mean, again, to bend over backwards, to your point. That doesn't mean you go out of your way if one kid needs, right? But there is something about accommodating the emotional intensity of these kids without I don't even know what the word is, without enabling.
Mm-hmm.
So does that come up for you in this framework or?
Yeah, of course. Yeah. Yeah. So I think, I don't really think about, when I talk the emotional part, I think of it as that kids can, express themselves however they want, as long as it's not, hurting anybody else or it's disruptive to the whole home and so on, or causing stress for everybody else. And, one of the things I teach parents, I say, we have to teach kids, it's okay to be angry. It's not okay to be mean,
Yeah.
It's okay to be upset. It's not okay to be destructive.
Right.
Things like that. So in, allowing kids to, have whatever feelings they have, but that doesn't mean we need to, start over explaining things or over empathizing with them or over negotiating or over accommodating.
Right. Yeah. Where our job isn't to make them happy.
Right.
Right. Our job is to raise kids who can be able to flow with what's happening in the world because things change. And a lot of kids with ADHD struggle with transitions and with things changes. How do you speak to that?
Yeah. So I have a saying, I say flexibility is cultivated, inflexibility is accommodated. So what that means is that we have to, again, teach kids to be, teach them about flexibility. So for things like transitions, one of the things I talk about is, doing a lot of front loading about what the transition will visually look like. Helping kids understand that, we might have a plan for something, on a Saturday, but that plan might have to change, or things might not work out how we want, or, it might start raining and we can't go to, wherever it was you wanted to park or wherever you wanted to go to. So just the idea that if we can prepare kids that, life has a lot of unexpected moments in it, and we kind of, we have to learn to roll with the punches. And again, however you feel is fine. Okay. But that doesn't mean you get to behave however you want based on your feelings. Yeah.
Yeah.
And my kid, yeah, go ahead.
Well, I was just, what came up as I'm hearing you say that, one of the things I've grown to talk about a lot with parents is the value of acknowledgement. That you can acknowledge how a child is feeling, to recognize that that feeling for them is real without enabling or accommodating or giving in, or right. You can recognize that must feel really frustrating for you, scary for you, upsetting for you, fill in the blank. And still say, and here's what we're having for dinner.
Right, right. And I would go so far as say that's a necessity to do that, to acknowledge that. Yeah.
Yeah, agreed. That if you really don't know how to handle a troubling behavior, chances are the first step is to acknowledge whatever's going on for them.
Right.
Right? Because it's real for them. That doesn't mean that they can be rude or disrespectful or anything else. But whatever they're dealing with, there's a reason for that behavior. There's something real behind it for them, and recognizing that it's legit, not going into that, oh, don't feel that way, honey.
Right. Or start playing what I call armchair therapist, where we start, analyzing it and spending too much time focusing on the feeling. Because one of the things, I teach parents to teach kids is that all feelings are temporary. We're not happy forever. We're not sad forever. We're not mad forever, and feelings come and go like everything else. Yeah.
All feelings are temporary, all of that.
Feelings are temporary. There you go. Yeah.
So let's take a quick break, and then we're going to come back and talk about skill development. Hi, it's Elaine. And if you like this podcast, you'll love our coach approach. Whether you're a parent looking for support or a professional supporting families, we invite you to download a free guide with 12 key coaching tools at impactparents.com/gift. You can begin using a coach approach to help kids become more independent or improve all of your conversations at work and at home. That's impactparents.com/gift. Welcome back, everybody. My guest is the ADHD Dude, otherwise known as Ryan Wexelblatt. And we had a great conversation about kids being anti-fragile, love that language, and the importance of fostering resilience and cultivating a growth mindset. And we're going to shift it. You had said there were two key messages. One was for parents. One was that, and the other is that skill development is a work in progress. So let's talk about that a little bit.
Yeah. So, one thing I say is that, skills don't develop on a time frame that's convenient for you. I imagine you guys get a lot of people reaching out in June at the end of school. And, suddenly it's, okay, we're ready to do all this. And that's okay. I always say better late than never. And you always have to start somewhere, but it can be really hard when people have chaotic lives and they're, trying to manage, multiple demands with work and kid and their own mental health issues and taking care of aging parents and all these things, to kind of keep this in perspective that, this skill development doesn't necessarily happen over the summer when it's convenient for us. So that doesn't mean we need to make this a full-time job. But there's little things we can be doing throughout the day to help cultivate independence and independent problem-solving skills and executive function skills.
Okay, like what?
Yeah. So let's talk about, I guess, the morning, for example. One of the things that I teach is, how do we help kids move from prompt dependence, meaning, go get your shoes, get your jacket, don't forget your lunch, to independence. So, being able
I want to stop you just because your accent, I know I had a hard time. You're saying the difference from prompt dependence, that is people responding to the prompt of go do this, go do this. We would call it director mode, but.
Okay. Yeah.
And then into what was the other term?
So when I talk about prompt dependence, I'm thinking about it more from the kids' angle. So prompt dependence, meaning they're not going to do these, daily routines necessarily without being prompted,
okay,
from director mode. I would
Right.
say. Right. So I talk about shifting from prompt dependence to independence.
Okay.
You know,
So where would a list fall? Like, let's say you've got a kid and at their place at the table at breakfast, there's the list of the things they're supposed to do. How does that fit into that framework?
okay, you can cut this out if necessary, but I don't use lists. I don't.
I don't use either, but some people do.
Yeah.
So
So I don't teach parents to make lists for one, but one of the things we can do is, think about number one, what is it that they can be doing independently that they're not doing right now? And it may be a little more than you think, you know. So we have to start somewhere. So that's why I think starting, with a morning routine or an evening or, after school routine is always a good place. Because what we have to do in order to move from prompt dependence towards independence, we need to put scaffolding in place. So for me, what that looks like, for instance, is making a visual timeline in the morning. So a poster showing the child doing these different, steps in the sequence of their morning routine. So instead of saying to them, get your shoes on, get your jacket, it's go check the timeline or where are you at on the timeline? Because if they can go see for themselves what the next step is, then that's helping to reduce prompt dependence. And the other part is, shifting the way we use language with this to help build their nonverbal working memory, or what I refer to as future thinking skills. So that's self-directed.
How is a timeline not just a linear list?
Well, it's a visual list. Yeah, it is.
Okay.
But
So
there's a difference between seeing yourself doing the actual tasks versus seeing just words on paper. Yeah, but it is. It's a visual sequence. Yeah.
yeah, I mean, I'm just remembering back to when my kids were little, and I wasn't going to create it if they weren't part of creating it, and there had to be a visual attached to it, and
Right.
like
Yeah.
so there's a piece here that's about. I love what you said, which is what can they do more independently, right? And it's identifying, and I'm guessing that you would agree that you kind of want to choose one thing and then the next thing, that you don't want to do a whole bunch of things at one time. In our world, we talk about it as taking aim, but choosing the next thing and then the next thing, one thing at a time that they can do. What's the kid's role in deciding what that next thing is?
So I think there's two parts to this. One, what I often suggest to people is start with whatever time of day is most stressful at home for you. Because if we can make some headway there,
Yep.
and make, mornings a little less stressful, well, then maybe if the kid feels like, okay, my mom or dad isn't nagging me constantly every morning and mornings are a little more pleasant now, then they're going to hopefully take more ownership over this and feel like, oh, okay, I like this, and then letting them kind of take ownership of what they want to work on next and giving them a few different options. So whether that's, afternoon routine or, bedtime routine or, helping with chores around the house. I'm really big on kids feeling useful at home, and contributing to the home. So
Yeah. Yeah. So a couple things came up as I was hearing you say that. One is, starting with the most stressful time of day and still even in that tackling one thing at a time. So it might take a while to improve
Sure.
mornings. It's not going to happen with one little tweak.
No.
Just clarifying that for anybody who's like
It takes
jumping on
months.
that one. Right. It can take months.
Yeah.
Right. It can take a lot of time.
And that's okay.
But the whole game is that you're scaffolding some things while they're beginning to improve skills in
Right.
others. And it's the dance of the two.
Right.
So let's bring in inconsistent performance to this conversation. Okay.
Yeah.
It's one of the things you said earlier was skill development is a work in progress and their performance is inconsistent.
Right. You want me to give like an example of that?
Yeah. So how do you deal with this if your kid's making progress and then all of a sudden they were getting themselves out of bed and now they're not, or whatever, fill in the blank.
Right. So I think one thing is just to, accept that for what it is and just kind of try to look at it, without any judgment, about it, or, looking at it as some kind of failure on your part, or, definitely not a failure on the child's part, because again, this is what ADHD is. So the question is, okay, how do we get back on track and move forward? And that might take time as well. That might not be a day. That might be, a few weeks to get back on track, particularly, after like a school break or, during, summer vacation or whenever. So I just want people to have the expectation that that is going to happen, and whether that's with executive functioning, whether that's with behavior, whether that's socially, it's going to happen across the board,
Right.
whatever. Yeah.
And it's reasonable to expect it. And I think part of what happens often that I've seen is that parents will come up with some solution, some strategy, something they're going to try, and they expect it to work right the first time.
Right.
And they expect it to keep working. Right.
Yes.
And
Yes.
and it kind of doesn't work like that. It's more like herding cats than that.
Right.
Right. So we have to be flexibility. So that goes back to us and our role as parents.
Right.
Right. Cool. Okay, Ryan, what have we talked about that you want to highlight, or what have we not talked about that you want to make sure to include?
I'd like to talk about social skills a little bit because that's, my favorite topic. And I'm really, to my knowledge, I'm one of the only people, out there who kind of focuses on social skills for boys. And the way I'll just tell you real quick how I got into that was, working at a school that was primarily for kids. The school is basically half kids with autism and half kids with behavior challenges. I started realizing that a lot of the kids who were getting help for social skills, they weren't learning how to be relatable to their same age peers. What they were learning, and forgive me for saying it this way, they were learning to communicate like a middle-aged woman. Okay. Well, because all the staff at the school, for the most part, is female, and the speech language pathologist, God bless them, running these social skills groups, or whatever it was in school. They were really teaching kind of what they felt was the gold standard of male behavior, which is lovely if you want to teach, boys to be a gentleman, which I'm fully in support of. But saying, to your 13-year-old peer, may I join you? Or what are your hobbies? That doesn't go over so well.
No, I can imagine it doesn't. Well, and the beautiful thing about kids on the spectrum is that they're going to model whatever you teach them. So if you give them that, that's what they're going to bring out. Okay.
Right. And so one of the things I do, I offer school year programs. My middle school program, it started off, it was called How to Hang Out. And now I'll just call it a guys group. And what we really do in the groups, I should backtrack a little bit and mention, what the research data shows is that social skills groups are not effective for kids with ADHD.
Nope.
And if anybody wants to see that research, they can go to effectivechildtherapy.org and type in ADHD. It's number 5 there in terms of what doesn't work, tested and doesn't work. So one of the things that I really focus on is, what I call social executive function skills. So those executive function skills we use when we're sharing space with others. And really what I focus on is the things that, that don't always come naturally to kids with ADHD. So for instance, reaching out to your friends or, who you want to be friends with when you're not with them. Because for a lot of kids with ADHD, they're socially motivated. They like being with other kids, but it's out of sight, out of mind when they're not with them, right? Because they live in the moment. So that's the kind of things I focus on, and, learning how to be flexible for being part of a peer group. Showing interest in others, by not having, one-sided conversations where you're talking at them, those kind of things.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah. No, it makes perfect sense. Like one of my kids really struggled with being a good sport when he was young, and being able to hear the word no, or not winning, or right. Those are the kinds of dynamics that he needed to practice.
Yeah. Being
Being okay with losing or hearing no or whatever. Great.
For that very reason, I started a elementary school program called How to Do Recess, where we play recess type games to work on sportsmanship and work on, cognitive flexibility and play and those kind of things.
Love it. Yeah. It's awesome. Perfect. All right. Anything else?
I think that's it.
Beautiful.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate the kind of structure of the conversation very much. It was super helpful.
Good.
Thank you for what you're doing. I appreciate it. It's a powerful community out there, and there's a lot of need, and the specific ability to really address that need, particularly for younger boys, is really important. So thank you.
Thank you.
One more question.
Yes.
I knew I was going to almost forget, but I didn't forget. Do you have a favorite quote or motto you want to share?
Yeah, I would say, and I think this is really relevant, more recently, is, the old African proverb that it takes a village to raise a child. Because I think the fact that, a lot of kids are not seeing grandparents or extended family or even family friends on a regular basis, or, cousins, this is the way we develop skills, both social and executive function skills naturally, is through this unstructured play and hanging out. And I do think that kids need the experience of being held accountable by other people besides their parents.
Yeah.
So, Yeah. So I'm a really big believer in that. I do think it takes a village to raise a child, whatever that village looks like for you.
Yeah, I was really, really lucky raising my kids that I had this very intentional community, and they were in and out of each other's homes, and everybody was aunt and uncle, and it made a big difference
Yes.
to know that I wasn't the only one saying you can't talk to him like that. you know.
Right. Yes.
So it's very powerful. Super. All right. Thank you, my friend.
Thank you.
To those of you listening, take a minute. Ask yourself, what's your insight from this conversation? What's your one aha or takeaway? What's the gem that you want to bring forward with you into your week? And as always, thank you for what you're doing for yourself and for your kids. At the end of the day, you make an enormous difference. Take care, everyone.
You've been listening to the Parenting with Impact podcast with Elaine and Diane. For more information on the Impact Parents community or to join Sanity School for Parents, please visit impactparents.com. If you like what you've heard, please share this podcast with friends who need similar guidance and subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts.